Thank you for coming to Nottingham City Centre. I'm Nick Simon, the New Culture Forum organiser for Nottingham. This is my good friend Bruce Goodwin, who's the New Culture Forum organiser for Beaconsfield. Really pleased to welcome Stephen Barrett, barrister, writer, all-round legal expert, regularly appears on GB News. Absolutely delighted to have him along, so thank you very much,
Thank you very much for
coming. Can we just have a little round, Nottingham round of applause? Thank you. Right, we're going to crack on. And I had a list of questions for Stephen. I'm going to stand up when I ask the questions and then sit down, and there's no need for you to stand up. I had a list of questions for Stephen to respond to, but sadly there's been developments in the last 3 days that would be remiss not to talk about. The first one being the tragic death of Charlie Kirk, the assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah, a good man. He leaves behind a wife and 2 children. I think we all send condolences and sympathy to his family and friends at this truly awful time. Just really, really shocking. So I would ask Stephen for his thoughts on the matter, but also to ask Stephen, do you think there are implications going forward for free speech? And also, do you think there are implications for how we deal with the radical left? Stephen Barrett.
Yes, I think we've all been very moved by the murder or the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I still find it difficult to conceive that there are 2 little children. One's a 3-year-old girl who is asking where daddy is, and his grieving widow has to deal with that. Bless her heart. This is evil, and it's very easy so I'm unavoidably intellectual. I am unavoidably educated, both formally and informally, because I study round subjects even if I don't hold technical qualifications in them. That has never concerned me. And I think being educated is a moral virtue, is a good. So it's very easy for people like me to sort of drift away from the concept of good and evil, and these very old concepts that human societies constantly return to. So there's got to be something to it. And I think that this is really an expression of evil in our world. One of the greatest advocates for free speech and open debate has just been murdered publicly in order to humiliate him and to scare the rest of us. Every cancellation is a step along this road. Frankly, every Twitter pylon is a step along this road. This is where the left have got themselves, the censorious far left and their Fabian Marxist allies stroke best pals. Now that's a dishonour to a lot on the left, so if you are politically left-leaning, please know I have left-wing friends I deeply, deeply respect. One is Claire Fox, who I think the absolute world of, Baroness Fox, who is not like this, and she is not evil. It is not the whole of the left that has suddenly turned evil. Maurice Glassman is another good example. There's a whole movement in what they call themselves Blue Labour, and they are just interested, as I think the Labour Party should be, in the working class, which is vitally important. They've obviously, the people in charge of the Labour Party have obviously stopped caring about that. And they've stopped caring about the working class, which is why there's this such divide. I mean, they had tokens. You know, Angela Rayner was welcome as a token member, but that's all she ever was. And I would actually I used to advocate in her defence because I think that she's very clever. But yes, Charlie Kirk's assassination is both monstrous, evil, and it has to represent what his organisation has called a turning point. It is now time for us all to be a little bit braver and to stand up and to say that this is not the world that we want to live in. Democracy and freedom are not normal for human societies. They are an oddity. Because of my own self-teaching, I started off with Bronze Age religion, but I'm broadly aware of sort of 10,000 years of human history and different types of human society. Often I'll take an interest in their legal system. That won't surprise you at all. I was adopted by an academic. My father taught himself to read cuneiform script, which is a particular type of impression. He's got some tablets of it, which they rolled out into wet clay, and then that would be their writing. The tablets never survived, but a lot of the cylinders did, because they're pretty tough stuff. And he taught himself cuneiform script so that he could talk and learn Hittite tort law. My father came to me and said, have you heard of the Hittites? And I went, of course, I do, sir. And I knew their religion. I didn't know it at all. But we have to be aware that human societies organise themselves in different ways and different times, and that democracy and freedom is a real oddity. Ruled by one alpha male, whether it be for religious grounds or on physical power and strength, is the norm for human society. So our beautiful country and everything I think it stands for, everything I think you coming here think it stands for, everything that Charlie Kirk, by the way, I'm so amazed at the respect and love and affection the Americans have for us. And he had such respect for us. He said that they inherited everything good from us. So everything in his eyes that was good, everything that in our eyes is good, it did start here. These are particularly special islands. I don't know if any of you know this, but Christianity really is the only religion that was ever going to lead to emancipating slaves, because it is fundamentally a slave religion, so it was always heading towards emancipation. These islands were the first to notice that a true Christian doesn't have slaves and doesn't allow slaves. And not only should we be very proud of ending the transatlantic slave trade, and briefly, sadly briefly, because it still exists now, briefly stopping international slavery, but many people don't know that hundreds of years before that, a judge called Lord Mansfield simply made an edict, passed in a case that said the air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe. We weren't an empire then. We didn't have this anywhere near the military might it took. We had to sacrifice lives, let alone billions in pounds, to stop international slavery. But back then we didn't have anywhere like that, so we were never going to stop it globally. But hundreds of years before we fought against slavery on a global basis, we simply said the air of England is too pure. So the minute you breathe it, you are free. And I've talked to, there's a chap who lives locally who's about 86. His brother's in the House of Lords, and his brother worked in British Aden, as it then was, and you would get slaves who would run to the British consulate, and provided they got to the British consulate and technically were breathing British air, they were free. And his job, a joyous job I should think, was to just sign the document saying, yes, His Majesty's Britannic government, or Her Majesty's Britannic government, has emancipated the slave. And you are free, you are no longer a slave. And there is something inherently good about here, inherently worth standing up for, inherently worth fighting for. One of the points I like to make, Bruce has heard it so many times, it's probably boring. But for decades, they have controlled us by calling us racists. Now, I want to tell you a secret about that. The only reason that worked is because we're not racist. If you meet a genuine racist in this country, you'd be very hard pushed to find one. But if you meet a genuine racist, they're proud of being racists. Because that's their whole ideology, that's what they believe in. They believe in this nonsense that skin colour determines ability, and that people are morally good or morally bad based on, it's as bad as believing it's based on hair or some other objective characteristic that people didn't pick. And that's the evil of racism. But the control mechanism only works because we're not racists. If we were racists, it would never have worked. And now it just has to stop. Not because we're suddenly going to become racists, but because we need to develop a thicker skin to them. They cannot just call British patriots. So yesterday I went down into London to attend an event, and I spoke to a lot of people that we know, and a lot of people were there. I'm more politically active. But I wasn't at the march because I had my small child, who's 10 and a half, and I didn't want to take any risks. I didn't doubt or distrust any of the marchers. But I don't trust the Metropolitan Police, and I don't trust the bussed-in protesters. One of my friends is Adam Brooks over in Epping, and I think that Essex Police have behaved disgracefully, and I think they have brought these people in. I think they are paid agitators, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, and I didn't trust the entire situation with my precious child. And so, but as things are, my event finished around the same time that the march finished, and so we're walking back through central London around a lot of these marches. They did things which were basic human good. And there's a little steps down from where the spectator officers are onto St James's Park. They formed two orderly queues so that one side could go up and the other side could go down. Is there anything more British than that? And there's a great diversity of faces, because again, the other thing that these controlling loons who like to call us racists just ignore is that we're really diverse. You know, it's just we're already diverse. This is the idea that we're sort of 99% one race. It's not true. And even if you don't count for the last 80 years of immigration, although there has been a very long, we've had sustained and sustainable immigration for a long time. I don't think that's what we have now. And I think a lot of people are realising that. But we've had it previously, so we've got more diverse. But even before that, I mean, I'm obviously Anglo-Saxon. There are Picts. I've got friends who look Viking. You know, they just are a Viking. You know, you can tell that's what they are. The Normans were always our oppressive overlords, so we got very used to what they look like. You can spot a Norman. Usually, for very long periods of time, there was still the sort of mainstream idea of male beauty was a Norman man. I mean, even that I find vaguely just offensive. And there's the Scots and the Picts and the Celts and the Irish and the people in Cornwall. And you know, all of these different races. So we never submitted to an ethno analysis of anything, an ethnicity analysis. We utterly rejected that in the 1930s. That's why it never took off. Mosley's desperate, rather pathetic attempt to create fascism here was always, thank God, doomed. And you end up with P.G. Woodhouse taking the absolute mick out of him. Which again, by the way, having a dictator is normal. Then things about this place are special because they go against the dictator. And one of the ones you must never surrender is taking the piss out of people. Please don't take me seriously, as I'm not better than you. I'm not. None of this. We're all equal, and we've got to take the mick out of each other. And taking the mick out of, I don't know if everybody knows, but in P.G. Woodhouse's Jeeves and Worcester, that he lampoons Mosley as this ridiculous, pathetic attempt at a fascist dictator, and the great secret is that this would-be, mad dictator secretly, passionately designs women's lingerie, Ulily, and it becomes his control word. And this is just great. This is absolutely everything that is very British about this. Just lampoon them. And Churchill said, if you laugh at them, they can't. That's what they fear the most. Surrounded by their children and their bayonets. And they cannot survive laughing at them. So laugh at them. And if we're going to get our age back, we're going to honour Charlie Kirk's memory, which I think we should now. I think he should become a totem. He's an obviously good and decent man. You don't have to agree with everything he said. As far as I can tell, he didn't actually put forward that many arguments. He usually just went to colleges, which had become indoctrination hubs of Marxism and ideology, which is oppressive. That's not thinking, that's oppression. And he just asked questions. And would just question things. But he was murdered even for that. So we just can't have this anymore. It just can't be like this. I don't think any of us want to live this way. So yeah, I think Charlie Kirk has changed the world. For the better, I hope.
Good. Can I just add that what I think has been quite unforgivable is the way that the left have tried to somehow excuse his death on the things that he said. That's unforgivable.
It's very distasteful.
I don't think anybody on the right would ever suggest that any of them should be shot simply for what he said. So,
good point.
Yeah.
Right, we should go to the next section for me. So, just a small point, New Culture Forum is non-politically affiliated. So we can talk openly about politics, we can talk openly about culture without being accused of promoting any particular party or organisation. Now, on hopefully a lighter note, the second point, and Stephen's touched on it, but great. On a lighter note, yesterday in central London there was the Unite the Kingdom rally, and it was extremely well attended, I think well over 150,000. Recollections from the mainstream media may vary. Tommy Robinson, the organiser, has said that he hopes this rally will be the first step in a movement which will ultimately bring down the UK government. And also, the Overton window seems to be moving faster than Linford Christie. So, my question to Stephen, any thoughts on the event yesterday? And what do you think about the new political party that Tommy Robinson himself has joined and Elon Musk has endorsed, Advance UK?
So I'm also never publicly aligned to a political party, although I technically belong to one, although I just feel I'm becoming more and more independent because I think that's what the time calls for. I think the public and the politicians will need lawyers they can trust, and though it breaks my heart to say it, I'm not sure how many of them there are. And I don't really want to trespass too much on that because it is painful. But the march yesterday was deeply impressive. I think the numbers are far higher than what they're claiming, and I don't know why they bother with all of this. I saw one media outlet trying to equate in size the bussed-in so-called anti-racist protesters, who I think were about 5,000 to 10,000 with the massive march. I mean, it's just nonsense. If you take camera angles in a certain way, you can create a feeling and an illusion, but an illusion is all it is. I've not seen London that full of people since the Iraq War march. Genuinely, I don't think any of the Palestinian protesters got this far in size and number, and I'm counting it as the biggest, second biggest after the Iraq War, whatever anybody says. And there's all sorts of jiggery-pokery going on whereby the Metropolitan Police won't count the people that they kept on Westminster Bridge, so they didn't let them in. But if you take a photo, look at the photo of Westminster Bridge, it goes through. Well, I mean, there's just unbelievable volumes of people. That said, we also need to contrast with how few crimes were committed, because of course they're desperate. The far left, by the way, who betrayed the left, when I talk about my left-wing friends, who are genuine thinkers, who engage intellectually, and probably just see themselves as left-wing because they want to help ordinary people, which is what I want to do, and I don't see why that was ever a party political issue. But the new left, and has everybody heard the word Fabian?
Yeah.
Good. Because I call it the conspiracy without a theory. Because they put all this on their website, and they put it, their bloody emblem is a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know, we know what they're doing. And yet the first reaction, I sent them tweets about Fabians, and the first thing that happened was that a Fabian who writes for the Daily Mail immediately piled on me and tried to go, oh no, there's no such thing as Fabian. Oh, it's all the Fabians' fault. It's like, yes, this is literally all the Fabians' fault. They did this. This is called Fabian Marxism, and they are an ally of the far left. The far left become a useful tool for them. These children who are willing to shave half their heads off and dye the rest purple always notice the nose ring. That, to me, breaks my heart as a parent. There's a fantastic comedy show on Netflix now, I think, called Arrested Development, and it lampooned, there's a pornographic tradition in America where college girls are encouraged to show their private parts in order for beads at summer, there's a festival, spring break, that's it. And the Arrested Development just took an absolute stiletto knife to this tradition and gutted it with wit and humour and called it Girls with Low Self-Esteem. And it was like another volume of Girls with Low Self-Esteem. And these, when you see that nose ring, you're talking about a human being with low self-esteem. We need to have self-esteem back. But the Fabians don't want us to have self-esteem. That's why they call us racist. That's why they threaten to call us racists. This is going on, and we're going to talk about this much more. The reaction to that has to be unity on the right. So I'm not terribly happy with Ben Habib, who I know personally and like, because I just see it as another distraction. Now, don't get me wrong, if Nigel falls under I'm not even in reform, but if Nigel falls under a bus, we're going to have problems. If Nigel doesn't fall under a bus, I think we all know what's going to happen. And quite how that works and quite how the right comes together may not be visible yet, which is why I'm going more and more neutral. Because whoever is in government is going to need to fix our legal system, and maybe I'll get onto that a lot more later, but it is, the Fabians have basically used the legal system, they've corrupted it, they have absolutely perverted law, and not just perverted it, they've pushed you away from it. So they've made your laws and your legal system something you're not even supposed to worry your little heads about. Don't you worry your precious little heads about something that could send you to prison for years. What? In any sane society, you're going to care about your laws. You know, the king's motto is God and my lords. You know, they matter. So the Fabians have been conspiring against us. I'm not sure I see Advance as anything other than we have to deal with the fact that Nigel has a bit of a problem with Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe, and I would just rather see peace. I'm a peacemaker. Can we just all just make up? Obviously, if you're on the, if you want the best for your country, I think you come together now. I call it the Coalition of the Decent. I actually regularly invite my left-wing friends to join the Coalition of the Decent. And when you get to things like trans rights, where the Marxists have gone completely mad and caused even more chaos and mayhem, you often get quite a lot of left-wing feminist women who are more than willing to join the coalition. I think my friend Julie Bindle's this close to like declaring and coming over, because it's not the sort of the narcissism, the tininess of small differences between political parties is not what we face now. We're facing an existential threat. This is as big as the Second World War, which I would like to remind everybody, we fought as a coalition. Now, at certain points, you just put aside party politics, and Advance is a nice holder just in case something happens to Nigel, but if nothing happens to Nigel, it becomes inevitably a distraction. I think Rupert's done the course a lot more sophisticatedly, in a much more useful way, and he's not a political party, he's just basically a think tank, and that's very useful for fixing problems.
Ben's trying to get him to join Advance though, trying very hard, and I think he might.
Yeah, and I don't
have inside information on that. But.
No, but on the American side, I'm extremely grateful for everything that they've done for us, and there is genuine affection in this administration for the country, and that is remarkable. They love us, probably more because we've had our self-esteem ground down for so long, probably more than we actually love ourselves at the moment. But we need to learn from them. Trump is very wisely not getting involved in British party politics, because why would you? I think our politeness to our American allies and friends is to not get involved in their party politics. I think it was incredibly stupid of Keir Starmer to basically send the Labour Party over to campaign for Trump's rival. And that doesn't mean that I think he should have sent the Labour Party over to campaign for Trump. I think we should stay out of their party politics. We have no role in their party politics. They have no role in ours. Elon's wrong, I think, to stick his oar in on this issue, but he's very, very useful, just generally getting the message out. So, I mean, I was retweeted by Elon yesterday, and all of a sudden 20 million people have seen my tweets in a day, which is not normal. And so he is very good at using his voice in his platform. He's phenomenal when he sticks to issues he genuinely cares about. So the rape gangs, things that we can't say them. He can say, I don't think, if I could talk directly to Elon, I'd say, you can say things that the British people know and are upset about, but cannot say for fear of losing our jobs, for fear of being cancelled, for fear of anything, because of just how nasty this world that we live in is. And you can criticise us and say we should be brave and we should sacrifice and all the rest of it, and maybe we should, and arguments to be had, but Elon, that's where your vital role lies, not in trying to turn Advance UK into a rival to Reform, which, I mean, the Conservative Party is failing to become a rival to Reform, so it might be impossible even for the world's richest man. But I think he has a useful part to play, just not in party politics.
Brilliant.
Rupert Lowe actually admitted in Parliament the other day that Restore Britain is going to be a political movement.
Ben's working on him very hard to join though, so I don't know. We'll see. Watch this space. Anyway, next point, if I may. A few days ago, our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was strongly endorsing his Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. Sir Keir Starmer said that he was proud to serve with Angela Rayner, and a couple of days later, as expected, she had to resign for fiddling her taxes. Supporting her was therefore a major error of judgment by Sir Keir Starmer. Then just days later, Sir Keir Starmer was stoutly defending our ambassador to the US, Peter Mendelsohn. Just days before the state visit of Donald Trump, Starmer showed his support for Mendelsohn, knowing full well that there were lengthy and damaging emails that had come to light revealing Peter Mendelsohn's very close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. A couple of days later, Keir Starmer had to sack Mendelsohn. Again, Starmer's support for Mendelsohn would seem to be a major error of judgment. Stephen, should Sir Keir Starmer resign?
Yes, it's an easy one. The bollard has no judgment because the bollard is a Fabian and he is a product of late stage Fabianism. Fabians don't, this is what killed them. They began in the 19th century by people like George Bernard Shaw, great intellectual thinkers. Wrong, I would say morally evil, but great intellectual thinkers nonetheless. But they don't recruit on that basis. And remember, this is a long-form conspiracy, long-form communist march. So even on their time frame, I mean, George Orwell wrote 1984 because he thought it would take them 100 years. We've survived them for longer than that, thank goodness. But just imagine every generation of Fabians gets dimmer than the last, because they recruit not on the basis of intelligence or merit, but on the basis of commitment to the cult. So one of the reasons that the Labour Party can't get rid of Keir Starmer right now is that they've just got the Fabian, remember he's like generation 7 of the Fabians, they've only got generation 10s of the Fabians to replace him with, and by God are they dead. I mean, Hamish Falconer, I mean, for all the money his father spent on his private education, I mean, there's not a lot going on behind those eyes, is there? And they're just not able, and I don't mind talking in this sort of base way, because again, I think being honest and being absolutely brutal is a British tradition that keeps us safe, sane and holy. Do not judge me on the basis that I'm clever because I went to Oxford. Judge me on the basis of what I say, the arguments I make, and whether they make sense. And if they don't make sense, then call me an idiot by all means, for an idiot is what I will be. And all Hamish Falconer could do is read out the press release that the civil service gives him. And the problem is that the civil service will also be Fabian. So we're working on copies of copies of copies of incompetent people. And while things were good, we all played a part in this, because while things were good and the economy was fine, we were all sort of vaguely content. Oh, fine, government, don't care. Oh, Tony Blair's kissed a baby, great. You know, and that was how we operated, because we had lives to live, and we sent our talent into the private sector, and we didn't notice or care that the public sector and the political parties, and I would argue both political parties, although there are people on both sides who somehow slip through the net and are still competent and clever, but they have been deliberately selecting idiots because they support the cult, and deliberately selecting on the basis of loyalty to the cult. So Keir Starmer won't go until he's pushed, I think, because he's loyal to the cult, and he knows the cult has to be in charge, and there can't possibly be the risk that the Labour Party might pass into sane hands of non-Fabians, you know, which might actually be better for the country. So,
or the cult see him as a liability.
Or eventually when the cult see him as a liability, and the cult came up with this genius plan of how clever the cult is, we'll replace him with Andy Burnham, a slightly shorter version of Keir Starmer, who looks like he wears mascara, but is very loyal to the cult. Oh, and by the way, he has a history of total failure behind him. You know, when he was in charge of hospitals and we had the massive hospital scandals, the lady who died because she couldn't even be given a glass of water, all of this sort of baggage running Greater Manchester into the ground, the problem we have with Greater Manchester policing, which he's responsible for. No, says the cult. They'll all ignore that if you just, you know, have another identikit Fabian. It's like they took Tony Blair, who himself is not a great mind, but is still better than that. And they've just photocopied him until all of it has just sort of faded. And we're just dealing with multiple copies of the same thing that has just decayed over time. So the Bard should go. He should have gone ages ago. He shouldn't have been in charge. Yeah, I call him the bollard. I've stolen it from Boris, but he is just a bollard. That's all he is. There's nothing to him. There's no substance. Evelyn Waugh's got a lovely line, which is that he's not a real human being. He's like a little bit of a man artificially grown in a lab, and then sort of set loose upon the world. And the cult has rewarded him at every stage. And if you wanted to defend him, the best you'd say is that the cult said, just be Prime Minister, go on the telly, say this, and we will run the country for you and we know what we're doing. The far greater problem than an incompetent Prime Minister is an incompetent civil service. Don't forget that one of the great, Labour's going to pay for this at the ballot box. In my constituency, my MP was a nodding dog to this, but getting rid of the winter fuel allowance, they dodged the bullet last winter because it was a mild winter. As soon as we have a harsh winter and we lose pensioners, getting rid of the winter fuel allowance is going to come back to bite them. Every sensible government had said that you can't means test it because there are very, very few wealthy pensioners. I've got friends who are very wealthy pensioners. They just donate it to charity, usually a local charity. Anyway, but you can't means test it because you have to employ people to take it away from them, and employing them, those people would cost more than you'd save in the means testing. There's no level where you can set it because the vast majority of pensioners are very poor, so you'd just be impoverishing huge numbers of pensioners and putting them vast numbers at risk of death. So even Rishi Sunak, who's a sort of Tory Fabian, but even Rishi Sunak said, nah, mate, no, I don't want to do this. This is a stupid idea. In come the Fabian Labour Party, and they go, hello, Fabian civil servant, hello, Fabian MP, we want to do this. Okay, let's do that. And in he brings the cut on winter fuel payments, which is quite possibly the stupidest policy and most destructive policy I've ever seen anybody do. They have raised taxes and to suppress tax revenue. I'm sure our economists will take you through more of this. So they've literally put the budget off as far as possible till the 26th of November because it's just going to explode. They have crashed everything. There's nothing the Fabians touch that they can't ruin. And because I should stick to the legal side, but when they do it in the legal side, we used to have this marvellous concept called impartiality that kept the BBC pure and great and good through all sorts of political ups and downs and meant that the BBC was what the BBC was, as I remember it, as my granny would have remembered it, not as the BBC is now. Beautiful concept called impartiality. Just one word, and I could set you a few lines of a definition and then we have it back. And the Fabians took it, and they gave it to Ofcom, which is, of course, them. And Ofcom has poisoned the concept of impartiality with words. I did a podcast on this with a guy called Peter. I'm awful with names, I'm middle-aged. But anyway, I did a big podcast on this. We literally went through it because he got it on the screen. And I was able to demonstrate how the definition of impartiality doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You kill law with words. And they've killed that. And they've killed a load of other concepts that we have to rescue them, because I probably want impartiality back so that we can rescue quite a few institutions, not just the BBC, but the police will be better. Peter McCormack, thank you very much, Bruce. It's a 2-hour thing, so I thought nobody would watch it, but actually they did. The Fabians have done this. And it's because ambiguity gives them ultimate control, provided they have the respect and authority to determine control, which is why we must laugh at them to take away that artificial authority. It's why we must resist being called racists, because that's also their implied authority. They never call themselves racists, do they? Oh, no, never seen a Fabian call a Fabian a racist. They might be racist. But anyway, just take away these assumed, this is the emperor has no clothes, or the more modern version of kicking Bishop Brennan up the arse. Just take it away from them. And eventually they are exposed as utterly powerless. Now that's very risky, everybody. I don't want to warn people, but late stage Fabians think that they will create a communist utopia. They don't. Surprise, surprise. There's no such thing as a communist utopia, but surprise, surprise, they don't. In Germany, they call state collapse. So the person who wrote on this most eloquently is Stalin, another evil man. But Stalin thought that Fabianism, utilitarianism, ultra-liberalism, what the cult believes, caused the Weimar Republic to collapse, ultimately. And it ended up in a uniparty just as we were heading for, and we must avoid a uniparty to avoid this. We must restore democracy. I feel slightly better being here. Again, I have this faith that this island is a very special place, because again, even in total rule of law collapse, I think we'll still form queues. I think we'll be orderly. I don't think there'll be large-scale rioting, because I don't think that's what we do. I'm not going to riot. I don't know if anybody in this room is going to seriously go into a shop and nick stuff. That isn't happening. It's just not going to happen. We've never needed the police to be an oppressive force, because we're fundamentally good people. And I still think enough of us are fundamentally good people that even if we got to state collapse, I think we'd be okay. But there is a way around state collapse that maybe the questions will elicit from me later.
I think that there are lots of Fabians at a place called the Resolution.
There are, indeed there are.
Who now seem to have taken over the Treasury. You mentioned Stalin. I'm reminded of what he did in Ukraine to the kulak, which were the gentlemen farmers. It's rather reminiscent of what is now going on, the collectivisation of farms.
No communist utopia starts without a famine.
I just want to make a little point that has come into my head before. Can you just hang on a second? Because you may want to briefly reply to this. A little point that's come into my head before I go on to the next question. And I think it's worth mentioning. Nigel Farage said the other day that he thinks that I'm obviously not a legally minded person, a little bit more of a financially minded person. Nigel Farage said the other day that he thinks the next general election will be in 2027. I happen to agree with him. I don't agree with a lot of what Nigel says, but I agree with him on that. And it's, unfortunately, it's nothing to do with the United Kingdom march. It has everything to do with the bond markets. This current government is leading us off a financial cliff. The 10-year bond yield is already way higher than it was ever under Liz Truss. It also actually got higher under Rishi Sunak as PM than it ever got under Liz Truss. Nobody mentioned that. But it's way higher now, and I think the bond markets are losing confidence in Britain. And if the bond markets really go, that will bring down the government, and I can't see how much longer it can last. Bruce, you got anything brief to add to that as a financial expert?
Yeah, Nick's asking this because I used to work in the bond market. Yes, I mean, I agree with that. First thing I would say is the IMF are not going to come riding over the hill to help, because it's a very different situation to the 1970s. Just briefly, we borrowed a very small sum of money to replenish our FX reserves in 1976 because we had been defending the pound in what was then a very different, we'd come out of the Bretton Woods system collapsed, and we were trying to defend the pound when we had a balanced payments deficit, and also we were running, the government was running a big public sector deficit. But we only had, 45% debt GDP. So it was about defending sterling. Now is very different. The amount of IMF resources that would be needed to prop up a government that's now in 100% debt GDP would be phenomenal. It could take as much as 50% of IMF reserves. So it's not going to happen. The other thing that's different to then is that Dennis Healey actually used the IMF. When you borrow money from the IMF, it comes with strings attached. So Dennis Healey actually used that IMF loan to keep his backbenchers in order. The backbenchers didn't want government cuts, and Dennis Healey, who was a good chancellor in many ways, despite his leftward leanings, wanted to control the backbenchers. I think that's highly unlikely to happen now. You saw what happened with the welfare bill. The bollard has completely lost control of a government with a huge majority. The majority is actually a liability because it emboldens the hard left of the party. They're just not going to allow Rachel Reeves to bring the IMF in and start dictating policy. So that's not going to happen. So to the original point, yes, it is indeed going to be the bond markets that bring the government to heel. But it's going to be a process, and it's going to be very messy. I think this is why they put the budget back, because they really don't know what to do. They don't have any clue how to engender growth in the economy, because they think of the economy as a sort of sealed tank, right, where you move things around. They have no concept of growth. So the idea that you cut taxes and grow the economy, it just doesn't compute in their brain. So, but they don't know how to balance the budget, because of course spending cuts are anathema to them. So it's going to be very messy. The bond markets will start to, bear in mind that the government has to borrow 20 billion every month, right, to fund current expenditure and roll over debt and pay the interest on existing debt. So the markets will start to insist on higher and higher prices, higher and higher yields to get those debt auctions away, and that will then, I think, force the government to start to issue shorter and shorter debt. And that is the point where I think if the government doesn't wake up and do something, you will start to see capital flight from the country and sterling really start to weaken very sharply. So I'm not going to put a time frame on this, but that's the process, I think, of what's going to happen. And it probably will, I'm not sure it'll bring an election, but it'll certainly bring down the main figures in the government, and then we should worry about what we get in return.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bruce. Are you going to do
Yes.
that run? Thank you for that, Bruce. Right, I've got a question coming up which will require some legal expertise. So I will once again stand. Let's talk about something that nobody ever discusses, do they? Stopping the boats. Nigel Farage and the very super clever Dominic Cummings seem to be of the view that we can simply use the Royal Navy to turn the small boats around in the English Channel and tow them back to France. I personally hold the view that this is totally impossible, probably breaching English law, European law, maritime law, health and safety regulations, and if it were tried, and particularly if one migrant was drowned as a result, it would result in an international incident that could bring down the government. I just don't think it's workable. My question to Stephen, from a legal perspective, who's right, me or Nigel Farage?
Nigel, sorry. We are a serious country, and a lot of the time when I argue with fellow lawyers online, because they like to lie and they like to tell you that things are legally impossible, and I have such an easy ride under the UK Constitution. I was actually having dinner with a senior American, and I was teasing them because Trump is doing everything right to fix their system, but they've got one hell of a difficult system to fix everything in. At the core of our Constitution lies only the sovereignty of Parliament. And that means you can make or destroy any rule, any law in Parliament. That means we can do anything. So my fellow lawyers used to try, and they've been, the current president of the Supreme Court was quite forgiving to them. He said that there was a widespread misunderstanding of the Constitution that may have arisen over years of exposure to the EU, which I think is a very polite and diplomatic way of saying that balloons forgot which constitution they were in because they wanted to believe that they were in a different country than the one that they are, because I think they don't like this country. So they just don't want to admit that our constitution is what it is, but our constitution is what it is. And Parliament will be sovereign. So provided Nigel has a lawyer he can trust who drafts the laws the right way, because you can't breach domestic law, so you need to destroy domestic law before you reach it. Then it doesn't exist, so you're not breaching it. You need to uncouple, or what we call unincorporate, very fancy word, international law, because international law exists, but and it's all up there as like a load of floating balloons. And it's been going on for thousands of years. So, there's international law treaties between Egypt and the Hittites, just to go back a few thousand years. There are trade treaties between them, and that's international law. Now, we don't pull that trade treaty for the copper, X amount of copper must pass between Hattusa and Cairo, or Memphis. We don't put that in our law, because firstly that would be completely bonkers, but it's got nothing to do with us. So we use this regulatory control mechanism to pull these balloons out of the air and put them into our constitution. And before, they screamed at me when I pointed all of this out, and I was called a complete moron and an idiot, and then the year later, and they really tried to destroy me. It was very, very rude. I fed up with the rudeness of it. I was also right. But then a year later, the Supreme Court said I was right, but I was relying on a case from 1968, where the government of the day had signed one of these Geneva Laws of the Sea treaties, and then gone, oh no, that could be very disastrous for us. So 7 years later, have gone, yeah, we're not bound by this treaty anymore. We regret signing it. Terribly sorry. There we are. Bye. And that had been challenged by those who had vested interests who wanted that to go through, and it came to the court, and the court simply said, no, it's not incorporated into English law. The Parliament never passed this into our laws. They never took that balloon. They never tied it in, incorporated it with sewing, stitched it in, so it's floated free. And a very simple phrase, which is that judges cannot see it. Once international law is not in domestic law, it's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that we can't see it and it has no role to play in our world. It's gone off to Narnia, it's gone second star on the right and straight on till midnight, and it's gone to wherever fantasy land international law lives in, but it's not here, so it doesn't matter. And what Nigel needs to do is to get rid of all the domestic laws that stop him, get rid of all, unincorporate and float off all the little international law balloons that would stop him, and then return them to France. And I would return them to France because I think that's much easier and much more practical and will result in fewer deaths. But we are going to have to harden our heart to the idea of deaths. Okay, people don't just get to break into your country and get a free house because otherwise they'll kill themselves. But if you allow somebody to say, you have to do this or I'll kill myself, then that person is controlling you, and that is a bad person because humans should be free and shouldn't try and control other people. You know, that's an emotionally manipulative control. And that's, when I talk about the nose-ring people, I think they're very susceptible to this. I think people do say things like, oh, if you don't do X, I'll hurt myself or kill myself. It's something humans do, but it's an evil humans do. And there's no difference from that in a Channel migrant who's saying, don't turn me back or I might fall into the sea. And I think France is the most obvious place to send them to. I think France has a moral duty because France is obviously letting them come. And I'm quite angry with the French government right now because we've paid you hundreds of millions for a number of years and you have done sweets all about it. And I also think it's a good idea to send them back to France because France is very close to collapsing anyway. And so if France is just having a major crisis, push them back to France. It's just so much easier to do rather than the expense of taking them to Ascension Island. Another option is, so when I went back to that point on slavery, and we said the air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe, the transatlantic slave traders were terribly angry at us for doing this. And they were like, how dare you do this? Because they used to process them here. They used to bring them on shore and then ship them out to the colonies. And that's the triangle. And they couldn't do that anymore, all of a sudden. So what the then cities, and this is why the cities like Bristol and Liverpool have such, I think, such guilt now about all these issues, is that they allowed in their harbours great ships that were frankly seen better days, so like a retired cruise liner, to sit in their harbour. And the traders would transfer them from the ships that went down to Africa, which are a different type of ship. They don't need to be as good a ship as the ships that have to get across the Atlantic. So you have if you're a slave trader, you have your Atlantic ships going like this, and you have your non-Atlantic ships going like that. And they would transfer them to barges in the harbour in Bristol and in Liverpool, and probably quite possibly some other places, but Bristol and Liverpool in particular. And they got round the law because they hadn't set foot on England, so they're not breathing English air, they're breathing Channel air. And so they got round it. And I think that is a solution we could do. We could put a load of decommissioned ships and do that. But then we're going to get into the fact that they're going to be in terrible condition. We're going to have to be under a duty to process them. The Home Office doesn't seem to be capable of processing them. So Nigel's option of just making them France's problem, that's what France is doing to us. France is making them our problem. France doesn't feed them, clothe them, give them houses, give them anything. Frankly, the conditions they're in France are disgraceful and nothing like here. But if they're lucky enough to get on a dinghy one night and evade, the world's worst security guard, that is the French police, then they're able to come here and get all that stuff. Well, that's simply France being, I'm frankly, not an ally and not a friend. And turning back to France can be done as law. What you should never do is allow me to dictate policy. So the one thing I like to say is that lawyers are servants, not master. So if you want that policy, and that you vote for Nigel, and Nigel has that policy, I'll draft it for him and I'll make it work. If Nigel has another policy, or if somebody else wins the election and they want to use Ascension Island, I'll make it work. I'll draft it, I'll make it work. I gave the last government legal advice that I think emergency powers can be used now on migration, and that was them. They can definitely be used now. There's all sorts of existing laws we could still be using, but I think we do need to redraft quite a lot of things. When the first Rwanda, I'm going to tell people very honestly, I told Boris's government that the first Rwanda scheme would fail. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in all its honesty, that man who's president gets it. He's not a fool. He doesn't want power and control. He's not like the Spider Roach lady. He wants lawyers and courts to go back to being things that you don't upset ordinary people. So he did not want to fight against the Rwanda plan. In fact, there's part of the judgment that I think is literally specifically written for me, so that I would hear his words where I say, I really don't want to be taking a policy position on this. It's like, yeah, I know you're not, mate. I know you're not. but the plan didn't work because they didn't do the hard bits of repealing the domestic law that needs to be repealed and repealing the international law. But because he was so meticulous, he's literally set out a plan for all the laws you need. Like if Nigel came to me and said, no, let me speak, and then said, Stephen, you have to draft this law, I'd immediately get that judgment. I would go, okay, that needs going, that needs going, that needs going, that needs going. It's like a legal framework for how you change the law to make Rwanda work. Rishi did none of this. And so I again warned the Rishi government that this wouldn't work. And I had a stand-up row with a civil servant lawyer who lied. As far as I'm concerned, she was lying. She may just be stupid. Really doesn't matter which one it is. And said that it would work and these things didn't matter and they didn't have to do all of this. And I was just like, this Rwanda scheme is rubbish. I wrote on that, but he called the election before and then Kia binned it. But it would have failed in the courts, I swear to you. What's telling is that I can tell this, warn governments of this. The civil service lawyers don't warn governments of this. They don't see it as their job to make government policy work. They don't see themselves as servants, they see themselves as masters. And that's why it's really important that lawyers like me, I'm not a civil servant, but I can't get grand and start being better than anybody else. We're not trying to create Stephen land. My job is to do the drafting that a government would require, or my job should be that. Nobody actually employs me to do it. But I think someone should employ me to do it because I would do it for them. And that's what we need to get back to, that tradition of doing. And because we were in the EU, where lawyers have a totally different power, they're very, very, very powerful people inside the EU, they got used to it, they got drunk on it. Power corrupts. And our civil service and our government lawyers have been corrupted by power. And they're not going to give it up now. I think you have to get rid of them. Sorry.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's great, thank you. I'm going to go straight on to the next one, might as well crack on. So, leaving the ECHR. People say that if we were to leave the ECHR, it would cancel the Good Friday Agreement, but would it? Or is this just the Remainer establishment gaslighting? If the answer is yes, it would, in practical terms, would that actually matter?
So, Bruce and I were both at an event on Thursday where Suella launched the Prosperity Institute with Lord Frost and Richard Tice, their plan for leaving the EU. And I made some very technical points to prove, because I think they made a few little errors, but I adore Suella, I think the world of her. She's just very nice as a person. Okay? I break the world down basically into two types of people. People you can leave your kids with, and people you can't. And it's the people who I can't, who I worry about and don't like, and I don't care which party they belong to or whatever else it is about them. You're wrong as I don't like you. If I can leave my child with you, then you're good egg in my view. Suella is, without question, somebody I would leave my child with. She's also much more funny in person. She's another one of those politicians that was ruined by the camera and sort of turned into this very still thing. She's a lot, probably shouldn't say this, but a lot prettier, a lot more beautiful in person because she animates, where again, she's very, I don't think the camera's very good for her. But anyway, we were all at this event. We can leave the ECHR because Parliament is sovereign. So all they've done over the last 30 years, there's been a conspiracy, I'm going to call this out now, in the civil service and amongst government lawyers and amongst left-leaning lawyers to make it impossible to leave the ECHR. But it's been a doomed conspiracy from day one because Parliament can make or destroy any law. Because they had to delude themselves. They had to have what Lord Reid called this misconception of the Constitution to even think that their cunning little scheme would work. But they have two arguments now because they're so clever that this is what they've written. I was telling Bruce about this in the car. The TCA agreement is the agreement between the UK and the EU that upon leaving the EU. Is that okay? Does everybody get that? Yes. I was reading it when it came out, and I read a bit, and I just went, what? A bit weird. And it's because in part of the sections, both parties, the EU and the UK, were given the power to suspend part of the treaty, quite an important part, well, probably not that important practically, but one that the media would scream and scream and scream about. And they were given that power if either party denounced membership of the ECHR. Now, Stephen Spidey says, I'm an English lawyer and have been for years, and I draft, talk, all my language is like an English lawyer. Denunciate. Denounce. What? That's not one of our words. We don't talk like that. I've not seen that in I'm very lucky in my memory. I'm blessed with it. I can remember most of what I've read in case law and statutes, and I'm not sure that I've seen that word anywhere else. I'd like to control F it in some of the longer documents, but I'm pretty sure I've not seen that word. So immediately I was like, what on earth are they on about? And then I found it. It's in Article 58 of the ECHR Treaty. It wasn't there when we signed it, which I'll get onto again. I hate the ECHR because it changes the document. It changes the contract whilst you're signed up to the contract. That's not fair. That's evil. You know, when Darth Vader says, I'm altering the deal, pray I don't alter it any further, that's proof that he's a bad person, not that he's a good person. So the ECHR changing the deal and inventing this Article 58. Well, it turns out Article 58 is how you leave the ECHR under its own rules, and it uses the word denounce. You denounce the treaty to leave it. Weird word. I don't like it, it's ugly. But that's what they were doing. Now, stick with me for a couple of seconds. Treaty between the UK and the EU, two parties, both have the power to punish the other if one denounces the ECHR. The EU's not a member. So the EU was never going to denounce the ECHR because it never joined it. It was actually bound by law to do so. The Lisbon Treaty says it will join, but it lied through its... That's another story, I'll bore you with that. But it's not a member, the ECHR. So if you're not a member, you're never going to be able to denounce it. The only party who would ever denounce the ECHR would be us. So, and I think one of our civil servants, not the EU, one of Lord Frost's own team said, put that in to make it harder to leave the ECHR. I'm worried that a future government might try and leave the ECHR. And a lot of what they've been doing, a lot of what the Fabians do, is like this fear of a future government that's going to be really tyrannical. They have no faith in the people, they have no faith in us, they think, you know, we're just idiots, and so they have to protect us from our own selves. And this conspiracy to keep us inside the ECHR is in the TCA. I think it's also in this Windsor Framework, sorry, not Windsor Framework, well, I'll explain what it is, but in the Belfast Agreement point. Back in the days of the Belfast Agreement, we understood that there are two distinct types of documents. The Belfast Agreement, which is diplomatic text. It's really woolly, it's nice, it's aspirational, it's not law. And we lodged it with the UN symbolically. We never bothered incorporating it. What we instead did was we wrote a whole domestic law act, the 1998 Northern Ireland Act, and that was our law, diplomacy law, and that was our law that dealt with Northern Ireland. And we've tweaked it over the years, changed it over the years. What Legarton said was that that means that we were tweaking the Belfast Agreement. And I'm like, no, the diplomatic text stayed where it was in diplomacy land. We didn't actually change it. I think Legarton's completely wrong on that. But we changed the act because that's what we do. We use the fires of Mount Doom to change the act, destroy a bit here, build a bit there, tweak the act because we, you know, how we relate to Northern Ireland has changed in 27 years, and that's perfectly normal part of the process. I think that the bad people who want to keep us in the ECHR were watching me, and I was crowing about re-establishing this line about what incorporation is. Please tell me that you all, as long as you all understand incorporation, you can never fall to a tyrant. It's a way to keep you safe from international law being used to control you. The best way to preserve democracy is to understand this point about interpretation and the balloons. Keep it as an understanding. I had crowed about that because I was glad. After they'd attacked me for years, I was sort of smug. I sent some tweets asking, you know, if they needed an address for flowers and chocolates, you know, just so, because obviously they'd been apologising, of course they never did. But I pointed out, and maybe I shouldn't have done, but I pointed out that the Good Friday Agreement had never been, that balloon was sent to the UN to live with its balloon friends. It was never put into English law. In the Windsor Framework, which is a series of laws, which is, again is just unnecessarily complicated, and it's maximum complexity because the Fabians don't want you to find out what they're doing. But the Windsor Framework, I think, is the first time ever the text of the Good Friday Agreement is pulled like a balloon and sewn into our laws. And you've got a judge, a lovely judge in Northern Ireland. I always think the union's great because we all add something. But he was just so frank. He was just like, this document is so badly written, it is diplomatic language, it's almost impossible to interpret as law. He's grumpy. You've got a grumpy judge. He's like, oh, what is this nonsense? But it is now in our law. So what you need to do to leave the ECHR is two things. You don't want to trigger that little booby trap they put in the TCA. Okay, so don't denounce to leave the ECHR, leave it by Act of Parliament. Easily done. And then we're never denouncing it. And don't use the word denounce in that Act of Parliament either. Be extra safe. And if the EU comes along and says, you've broken our treaty, we'll say, no, we haven't. We've never denounced anything, mate. On your bike. And the other one is we've got to unpick that little, it's just a few lines incorporating the Good Friday Agreement. It should never have been in our law. We knew that in 1998 when we were actually better lawyers. But they're getting so desperate now that we might leave the ECHR that I expect them to get even more sort of hysterical about all of this. You will see all sorts of mad claims. I mean, the most ridiculous one is that Britain will look bad on the international stage, or we'll be like Russia and Belarus. It's like, okay, well, who are we illegally invading then? Because I quite like parts of France back. So, if I'm going to be like Russia, I may as well just invade. But, this is patently nonsense. Always know that Canada, Australia, New Zealand, America seem to do perfectly well without this office block in Strasbourg, which is full very largely of legal academics from jurisdictions that don't understand a single thing about our country. So why they should run us is mildly mad, but that's a political point. If you want to stay in it, we'll stay in it. If anyone wants to leave it, I'll help them draft it, because it's a minefield, because there's no way that is accidental. Why? There's no reason to incorporate the Good Friday Agreement. If there was no reason to incorporate it in 1998 or 1997 when it was signed, no reason to incorporate it now. The only reason I think you incorporate is to make it harder to leave the ECHR. They are working against the will of the people. And that will require good and honest lawyers, and I just worry about how many we have.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Actually, that leads on very well to the next question, which is about deportations. If we were able to leave the ECHR and scrap the Human Rights Act, in your legal view, Stephen, would we then be able to deport illegal migrants, and would we be able to do it quickly?
So, first point, the legal point, no. There's still more to be undone. And we need to go back to Lord Reid's judgment and undo all of it. Because there's another concept called refoulement, which is a French phrase, which is the basis for our current migration thinking, which is that you can't risk somebody who has fled a country being returned to that country. And that has been incorporated, sewn in, that little balloon of an idea, has been sewn in a variety of places. Don't worry, Lord Reid set them all out. So if we go to all of them and we delete all of those words, we will unpick it and the balloon will float away. That then allows us to deport. And it's remember my teasing of the Americans. The Americans are going to have to break international treaties or leave them. We can just unsew them and just whistle quietly and get on. It's great what we can do. That case in 1968 is Her Majesty's government can sign a treaty, and even within 7 days, if it is not part of our law, they may do as they wish, and the courts are blind to it. And that's our great freedom from this thing. Otherwise, international law overrides democracy, destroys democracy, and is your boss. And that's why the Fabians want it. But it's just not going to work. They're not going to get their communist utopia. They're just going to collapse the state. That's why we have to laugh at them. Laugh at the Fabians. Anyway.
Brilliant. Anyway, next question, and again a quick one. The Online Safety Act. Is this act really about protecting children? Or is it more about censorship?
That's a very, very loaded question, because I helped one member of Parliament who I really like tweak a bit of it, because the civil service got my back up, and usually I just get angry at civil service lawyers. Civil service lawyers were telling this member of Parliament that he couldn't have his amendment to the bill because it would be unlawful and not part of our legal system, which is not true. So I found example. I just said, I was just called by him, and I said, just let me go downstairs and turn on my computer. I'll find you a load of examples where we do this already. And I think I sent him 100 in like 5 minutes. Just like, shut up. And then I sort of sat down and thought, Stephen, do you support this policy at all? And I just thought, oh no, this is a very bad idea. It's like, no. But it's, again, because I see myself fundamentally as servant, not master, it wasn't really for me to say to that MP, this is a really bad idea because of X, Y, Z. Nadine Dorries did a beautiful piece on the Online Safety Act, because Nadine, again, is somebody I would leave my kids with. Okay, she's a decent human being. You don't have to agree with Nadine on anything to know that she's a decent person who you leave your kids with. Claire Fox, who's a Marxist, I'd leave my child with, and she's one of the members of the House of Lords who hugs me. I mean, we just got to get basic decency back. Anyway, Nadine said she was genuinely motivated to protect children. The MP I was helping really wanted to stop young girls in particular being directed towards anorexia and suicide information on the websites. Now, the way that you protect children is actually through parents, not law. And I think we need to get back to that. Law can't do everything. We're not as magical. The one difference between me and every lefty lawyer is a lefty lawyer would come here and tell you how terribly important law is, and law can all sorts of... It's just tosh. It's absolute tosh. We're not a replacement for morality, and we're not a replacement for parenting. And the Online Safety Act falls into that trap. Now Nadine just admitted, she said, I thought it would protect children. I now see it's just a tool of censorship. What the Fabians do is try and use your goodness as a weapon against you. That's why I genuinely think one of the best things we could do as a country is remember the wisdom of what, when I was little, the wisdom of little old ladies. So the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay, we need to get all of these axioms back, because they're how you fight Fabians. The Fabians have been around for ages, so people have been fighting them for ages. There's a reason why 1984 is 1984. There's a reason why, even in C.S. Lewis, the White Witches, evil security officers, they're wolves because they're Fabians. That's what Lewis is warning you about. Beware these wolves, you know. And we've always been fighting them, and we cannot allow our goodness to be used against us. And that means hardening our hearts sometimes, which many of us don't want to do, and it's not natural to us. British, I think, are particularly susceptible to Fabians, and I'd even go so far as to say the English are particularly susceptible to Fabians, maybe the Welsh too, because they're also terrible softies. But we are the softies, so often I find comfort in the future of our country in my Scottish and Northern Irish friends, because they're a lot more punchy. And then I went on a podcast with a Scots guy, and he was just like, the words coming out of his mouth, I mean, I can't say them, I'm too squeamish, but it was like, yes, it probably is appropriate to say them. I mean, we're just going to need to stand up to these people. And the Online Safety Act is clearly, one, they've completely messed up because they've really, really angered the Americans. And always thank God that we have the Americans on our side, because they will just not have any of this. But I think to most of us, they've shown what they are and what they really intend to do. And we might need to, and I'm also susceptible to this because I'm terribly English, that we might have to talk about subjects that we get a bit squeamish about. And we don't really want to admit that certain things happen in our societies, that certain types of websites, young gentlemen might visit for various reasons, and we might have to grow up about all that, because again, we're sort of manipulated by these people into this task. The Online Safety Act is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pointless, useless words, all aiming at controlling you, because that's all the Fabians want to do. They just want to control your life. Did you see Ed Miliband put out a story that he wants to control funerals now, to stop that? Oh yes, you remember how we're all supposed to be scared of plant food? That tiny 1.something% of the air that the plants eat, that apparently is going to kill us all somehow. Don't know how. Anyway, apparently it's going to kill us. Well, to control the amount of CO2 in the air, which of course we can't do, but anyway, to control the amount of CO2 in the air, we're going to have to not have funerals or not have cremations or something. I don't even know. I didn't even read the story. I just thought the entire thing is bonkers. All he wants to do is control you. All I want to do is be in every aspect of your life, telling you what to do. Now, I soft Southerner and soft Englishman I might be, but I want you all to be free. That's all I want you to do. Go and live your lives, be free, be happy. And I think that's what I want my country to be. And I go around and I talk to things like this, and I talk to people and I try and get ideas across, because fundamentally, I think that the Fabians are odd in a way. I genuinely think that they just can't deal with the fact that they die. Okay, and I have faith, so I'm pretty comfortable. I recognise I'm not going to be here forever. I have a temporary period of time. It's only going to be so long, and then when I'm gone, who's going to look after my child? Well, the world needs to be a damn sight safer if my child's going to be on their own. I'm not leaving my child alone in this world. This one, no, this is evil. My child will not be safe. We have to fix the world for our kids. And this is what the Fabians always fail to understand, that actually, regardless of our politics, we're not going to buy into their cult Marxist gibberish, which often doesn't make any sense and is just endless words designed to sort of bore you into submission. I'd hate to go to one of their meetings. I'd probably just fall asleep. But terribly, terribly dull people. Fundamentally, we have kids, and we care about our kids and our grandchildren. Even if we don't have direct children, we'll have some other way or mechanism of having kids to look after. I've mentored for 14 years. I have one biological child, and I have a bunch of ex-mentees who I think of as my kids. And they're my kids. I haven't had a mum for 26 years. I've recently become one of Judy McAlpine's spare children, and I'm recognised as a spare child, and my child is a spare grandchild, and we've got a mum again. And it's lovely, and it's nice, and all of this stuff is what life is about. And the Fabians think it's about some sort of yabba gibberish intellectualization or success or power, basically power, but it's pointless. We know that really life is about having children, having families, making meaningful emotional connections to people, and admitting that we are going to die, facing up to that however you choose to do that. I mean, I know Ricky Gervais is a staunch atheist, but has faced up to the idea. The weakness of the Fabians isn't that they're atheists, it's that I think they just don't admit it. I don't think Keir Starmer admits how old he is. When I was telling Bruce, there's a Fabian who, I hate him because he's responsible for giving away the Chagos Islands, which irritates me on a number of levels. One, we're giving away loads of money as well that we don't have. Two, we're giving away the Chagos Islanders money, which they need. Once we resettle them, they need them. Three, the Mauritians are so mean to the Chagos people. They treat them like absolute second or third class citizens. So the ones who've been in Mauritius, now that Mauritius is crowing about beating us and getting the islands, they're now fleeing. So there are a vast number of Chagosians in Hillingdon because they fly into Heathrow, or in Crawley because they fly into Gatwick. There's a community to support them in Gatwick, but in Hillingdon a lot of them are sleeping on the rough on the street, literally having left the islands with the shirt on their back, because they are mean people. The Mauritian people are mean to the Chagos people. I'm bisexual, I'm same-sex attracted. If I had a boyfriend, my own Foreign Office advises me not to hold hands with him on the beach in Mauritius. You know that? Because we're admitting that they're not very nice people. We're giving the innocent Chagos people away to these people, giving their lands away to them. And one of the lawyers who's responsible for this is a man called Philippe Sands. I think he's an absolute, I don't think he's a very good lawyer. I don't think he's a nice person. I wouldn't leave my child with him. And I mildly needle him by just pointing out that I don't think a man in his 60s should be wearing t-shirts on television.
Can I just link to a question that I had as a separate question?
Yes.
Because
I may have digressed.
you've digressed slightly, but that's fantastic. So earlier in the year, the GB PAC launched a legal challenge on behalf of the Chagos Islanders, but you reportedly said the challenge was a car crash. Do you remember the GB PAC
I do.
legal challenge? Can you just explain your logic behind why it was a car crash?
Well, they lost, for a start. But also, I don't think they applied the tools that they should have applied to. So they're in a bit of a legal bind. We're in a bit of a mess anyway, because almost all the institutions are captured by Fabians that you're going to appeal to. So one of the problems is the International Court of Justice. Now, Fabians love acronyms because they confuse people. And one of the reasons I know the Fabians are involved in the ECHR is that the letters ECHR can mean they do mean two different things. They mean the European Court of Human Rights, and they mean the European Convention of Human Rights. But if you're not a lawyer, you're not going to pay attention to that all the time, so you're going to slip up, you're going to make mistakes. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, is different from the International Criminal Court, the ICC. Yeah, those letters seem pretty close to me, and easily open to confusion. The ICJ is the court that Philippe Sands persuaded to say something vaguely convincing that apparently scared Lord Hermer. Points on the ICJ. We don't have to be a member. We can leave. Okay? So it's not going to give our lands away if we leave. Two, when we joined it, we said we'll join on the express basis. You never make any ruling relating to colonial territory. Right. So the court cannot make a ruling relating to Chagos. But Philippe Sands got them close enough to say something vague enough that Lord Hermer was then able to interpret it as we have to give away our islands, and I believe has given legal advice. And I'd love to see that in the future government. And I don't know quite what the temperature will be, but I mean, that's where we're starting to talk about criminal negligence. You know, this is not wrong, because there is no legal argument to give away the Chagos Islands. Anyway, the PAC took a JR, a simple judicial review, to the English courts. Now, first of all, the judges are not going to be anywhere near this because it's political. So the good judges are still scared of politics and don't wade in. The bad judges are not on your side. Okay? 90% of the judges are still good judges, thank God. That was doomed to fail because the bar is really high for judicial review. Okay? It just is. I think they should have found some other arguments with lower bars in order to persuade the court to do it. I don't think they used all of their ammunition, and I think they should have pleaded human rights. Because actually, of the captured institutions, the ICJ is almost entirely Fabian. That's the International Court of Justice. The International Criminal Courts, well, yeah, that's staffed by Starmer's friend. They're all come from the Stouted Street Chambers or Matrix Chambers. They're all mates. So what the PAC is now doing is going to the International Criminal Court. It's bold, it's punchy. I think it'll just reject it. and then the pack will have lost again, and then the government will be able to say we're facing, malicious legal challenges, challenges that aren't. I would personally have gambled more with the ECHR. One, because it takes an awful lot longer to get there, so it's slower, so you can have your legal challenge for longer, which is more politically useful. Two, it's not completely captured by Fabians. I mean, there are more judges at the ECHR who I would suspect are responsible to Putin than there are our friends of Starmer and the rest. Just because of how the 47 countries that make up the ECHR member states. If you know where Russian money is, you tend to know where Russian influence is, because surprise, surprise, influence follows the money. So I would have gambled that it might even have been in Putin's interests to cause some chaos, or just that there might have been some sort of useful connection there, but I don't think it was very hopeful. Fundamentally, our government should not be giving away the Chagos Islands. And I am in, as I'm sure everybody is, in certain WhatsApp groups, and I'm in certain WhatsApp groups, and there was a lawyer postulating that sadly we can't reverse this once the islands are gone. And I was just much more punchy, because I'm used, and I think it's the type of lawyer I am. Public lawyers are very used to taking on noble causes and losing, or to being Fabian in a world of Fabians. I used to work for ultra high net worth individuals, so my job is to get them what they want and to find them a legal solution to what they want. I was once this incredibly wealthy, incredibly stupid man who I told him that he was an idiot, but he had signed a contract to hire a private jet for 2 years, because a lot of the times they don't own, they rent. And then immediately he decided that actually he didn't quite like the finish in it, so he'd signed another contract with another private jet company to do that. And then he was like, I don't want to have to honour this contract. I was like, you signed a contract. And I don't want to have to honour it. You keep this out of court. Keep me going as long as possible. I just want to rub their noses in it. I hate them. They're nasty people. They're mean to me. How dare they do this to me? I'll never use them again. Fine. So I tried to keep the case going for as long as possible. Managed to get it for about 6 to 8 months, but I mean, it was just absolutely doomed. When we came out of court, I said to the client to his face, we had 2 problems going in. One was that we didn't have a case, and the second was that the judge noticed. It was. But it's my job to sort of facilitate things. So again, I was just being punchy in this, but I was just saying, well, we'll just declare that the act was invalid, and then we'll change it. We'll say that the territory's ours, and then we'll send in the SAS. What are they going to do? You do it overnight. Do it quickly. Mauritius has got 1 ship. And it's not really a ship, it's like a little, lifeboat tug. What are they going to do?
Steve, is this why the US seem rather sort of...
No, I think the US are being misled. The Prince of Darkness was over there telling them all sorts of lies.
Yeah.
So I think no, this is Lord Mandelson.
Oh, right, cool.
So I think that's...
Sorry, I got that wrong.
I think that's why the Trump administration didn't know.
Yeah.
And one of the problems they have, they're desperately keen to talk to us, but they don't really know who's on their side and who's trustworthy. And there are so many Fabians around that, I'm not going to name him, but it was a Fabian who's in the Conservative Party who arranged the J.D. Vance visit. And that's why J.D. met up with a load of people he probably shouldn't have met up with, when actually he should have met a load of other people. And Nigel was able to get in a sudden breakfast meeting and to slide it in, because obviously he should have met Nigel Farage. But thankfully they're still learning, because they're very honest. Like they're not used to lying. Whereas Fabianism is entirely based on lying. So and I think it's poisonous, I think it's toxic, I think it's a very difficult thing to fight. It's all on their website, and they all publish all that, so it's not, and I still get called a conspiracy theorist. I still get fired on! It's like, it's all the Fabians. It's like, yes, it's literally all the Fabians. They told us they were doing it, and they're doing it. I don't know what more I'm supposed to say, but I'm punchy, and I think we should get the Chagos Islands back for the Chagos Islanders. Because for me, it's always been a deeply emotive and moral thing. Yes, our ally, the United States, needs those islands as a military base. And that's because of modern technology and where we are. And unfortunately, that means that the Chagos Islanders can't really reside there, although query question that, because I reckon a lot of them are very trustworthy. And I think if we vetted them properly, maybe many more of them could. But ultimately, America's not going to need a base there forever. So one day America's going to say, do you know what? Technology is now like this, this, and this. So we don't need these islands. We don't need a base. It's fine. We're going now. At which point we give the islands back. In my view, we give the islands back to the Chagos people. And we had this trust fund to look after them. It's literally a trust fund that we're also giving that to Mauritius. It's their money to help rebuild their society, and it's being given to Mauritius, who hates them. It's just perverse. These people are evil. Anyway, my view is that once the Americans no longer need it, we give them their island back. We do our terribly British thing of saying, now, you've got a range of options. Would you like to be an independent republic? Would you like to be independent with the king, or however, whichever monarch we've got? Would you like to be part of us still? You know, and we give them a range of options, then whichever one they pick, because I think that's how we dealt with the empire, and I think that's how we should always have dealt with the empire, and I'm rather proud of the way that we're probably one of the only human empires in history that went along to a bunch of territories and went, now, which form of leaving would you like to do? And let's had an open discussion, and it's quite funny, the Commonwealth is such an odd thing, because again, entirely voluntary, so ex-territories that didn't want to be in the Commonwealth were not in the Commonwealth, and then territories of other empires that were never technically in our empire. Would you like to, we'd like to join? Okay, yes, you can come to. And that's a very British thing to do, and I wanted this process to happen to the Chagos Islanders. And if they're all in Hillingdon and in Crawley, then I think we have a moral obligation to retake the Chagos Islanders. Mauritius has no claim to them. We sometimes think that we can't use military force in an aggressive way, and I would generally agree with that. I mean, I do think it's a pain that means we can't get Aquitaine back. But I even have to accept some things. But in that very specific incident of territory given away by frankly corrupt government for stupid, no logical reason at all, in an entirely and unnecessarily destructive way that will hurt the lives of those people, I would think that there would be a moral obligation on us to take those islands back. Let the Americans have their base, and then when the Americans don't need us anymore, take the islands, give the islands to the Chagos people.
Brilliant, thank you. That is excellent. Now, I have one last question for you, Stephen. Might be a little bit personal. In August 2024, you voluntarily stepped down from your position with the Ratcliffe Chambers. Was this prompted by comments you had made at the time about the Southport riots? What happened?
Yeah, so I got cancelled because I got retweeted by Tommy Robinson. And it was ugly, and it's nasty, and it's part of the world we live in. I don't regret anything because I don't think I'm a bad person. All I did was tweet that I cared about the little girls, which I do. I was contacted some months later by a granddad of one of the girls who was stabbed, and I have had lots of conversations with him. He's a very decent man, and he was very proud of my tweets. I didn't incite violence in any way. I'm not a loose comedy case, and they could have arrested me, they would have. But they couldn't even fabricate grounds to arrest me, because obviously I'm a barrister, and obviously I tweet in a very cautious way. But they were able to create enough hysteria about perfectly lawful comments expressing sympathy with those little girls. And I regret nothing, because I still sympathise with those little girls. The worst thing for me about Southport, I will never forgive Keir Starmer, because I think he instigated that. He sent out one of his little Stormtrooper MPs to tweet me to get up hysteria, and it was all piled on by Fabians, and there we are. Well, the idiots have made an enemy they probably can't stop now. But I care about those little girls. You know, how dare we become a country in which those little girls, all of them mixed races, by the way, again, pointing out that we are diverse. I will never forgive Starmer, because he's called Mr. 19 Seconds, because he went up, he walked, he laid a plastic wreath, and then he left. We now know to go and have drinks in the garden with Z-list celebrities at number 10. Your priority is completely wrong there, mate. Tony Blair and Boris Johnson would have gone into the crowd and hugged people. He was heckled by one of the parents of one of the victims, and I will never forgive Starmer for that. He's just a heart. That's why he's the bollard. The best thing you can say about him is that he's not a person. That's literally the best that I can come up with him. The other thing is that I really want, and if I'm ever near the levers of power, I will bang on about this till everybody's so fed up that they're just going to, oh, shut him up, we'll do it then. Is that there was the lady who ran the dance class. She got stabbed, very seriously injured, protecting those little girls. Very seriously, almost died. She's now traumatized, she can't leave her house. I want her to be the dame of this country. If being a Dame of this country means anything, then that is what a Dame of this country is. There was a gentleman who had the office opposite, who heard screaming and little children, and saw that children were at risk. So he came to help, because that's what a man does. That's what a proper man does. We protect kids. One of the things about the trans issue is it's been great for me, because being same-sex attracted wasn't that easy in the 80s and the 90s. When you sort of it wasn't that great a culture. We're much better now. So I've always felt as though I'm not a real man in some sort of sense. But I'm now seeing very obviously gay people like my mate Douglas Murray and James Dreyfus, who played the campest of characters and the nicest and the naughtiest, protecting kids, because a man protects kids. It doesn't matter whether we're same-sex attracted men or not same-sex attracted men protect kids. And this man protecting kids got himself severely stabbed in the leg protecting kids. That is a knight. That is what a knight of the realm is. It is not Sir Keith Starmer. It is him. And before I die, if I can get that done, I will be very happy when I pass, because what happened in Southport was a monstrous display of evil, and they've allowed this evil into this country, and they do have to face up to this, and I'm terrified of what is going to happen in the coming days. These migrant hotels are, lawyers say prima facie, if it just means on the face of it, or you might just say bleeding obviously, a risk to women and children. And therefore, because of the sheer scale of numbers, something's going to happen. And that is on the favourites. They wanted this. I cannot, again, going back to this idea they have that we're not diverse, it's like, I've got mates of every ethnicity who are British people, who are like, I don't know if any of you are on X or Twitter. One of my mates is much, much bigger than me. He's called Chris Rose. He's got like hundreds of thousands of followers. So Chris gets everywhere. I'm very, very envious, but I adore him. He's a proper mate. Again, somebody I would leave my child with. And Chris just goes into bat on this. And because he's black, they don't know what to do about it. And it's just like, what are you going to call Chris then, you loons? But obviously, any sane human protects kids. I mean, my child goes to a local primary school. I read to those kids in reception. A lot of them are English as a second language. So we went to, I volunteered. I would protect any of those children. And they were all very diverse and mixed. And my secondary children, my mentees, because I'm only selecting on the basis that they come from working class and disadvantaged backgrounds, they're as diverse as hell. I shouldn't say this because he doesn't want publicity, so I won't name the jurisdiction or the territory, but I have the world's first freed slave descendants to get admitted to the role of solicitors in this country. And that's my boy, and I'm very proud of my boy. And they can't divide us with all of this racism crap. A great friend of mine is called Alco, and she runs a charity called Don't Divide Us. And they are literally we refuse to be called racist, but we refuse to be divided. It's not in our nature. So, yeah, Southport brings back bad memories for me. They did it whilst, because they were monitoring my choice, whilst I was on holiday with my child in Southend, and I'll never forgive them for that either, because they just ruined my holiday. As I said, the idea that I'm in any way controversial should be bonkers. I shouldn't even be. I go back to what I got adopted by. So I lost my mother and father 26 years ago, but I got a dad. I got adopted by a dad who's a legal academic. My dad was huffy one day, which is not normal for him. He's as I said, he's off teaching himself Hittites or something. But he was huffy, and I was just like, what's the matter, Pop? Oh, this man, this professor. Oh, right. It's called Jordan Peterson, right? Why are you irritated? Well, he's become very famous, and all he says is perfectly obvious things. Like, my dad was literally just angry. He was just like, this shouldn't be happening. And Douglas was a great friend of mine at college. And Douglas Murray now is famous for saying perfectly obvious things. I mean, this is bonkers that we've had to get here. And the hysteria that we face if we try and oppose them. But I'm afraid now is the time to stand up. I wear 2 rings because I'm a Tolkien obsessive. Okay? I don't wear the elven ring of beauty because I think that would be dishonest. But I wear the elven ring of protection and security, and I wear the elven ring of hope. And I wear both because I think that's what we need now. We need to defend each other, and we need to spread hope. Because we're going to beat these people. They're spineless, wet wimps. I mean, I tell Bruce, I just said wimp to Keir Starmer because he's done something else. He can't take responsibility for anything, that man. They never can, the Fabians. Narcissists can't take responsibility for their own actions. And they're bad people, and they've destroyed our country, and we're going to get it back. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gents, we'll have a short break and then we will have a little Q&A. But I think that's been absolutely brilliant. So again, if we can please, another round of applause.
Thank you, Nottingham.